There never is a good time for tough decisions. There will always be an election or something else. You have to pick courage and do it. Governance is about taking tough, even unpopular decisions. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. President Maithripala Sirisena a few weeks ago said that there would be a cabinet reshuffle before the Vesak full moon Poya day. Vesak is falling on Wednesday. A few hours from now, precisely around 72 hours from now, would there be a cabinet reshuffle tomorrow? Now, this is in the mindset of the people of Sri Lanka. Then what happened last week? On the 1st of May 2017, there was the May Day rallies held and organized by many political parties. It was not about the workers' rights this time around. It was about showing political might. You had the joint opposition holding their May Day rally at Golface Green. You had the United National Party holding their May Day rally at Campbell Park. You had the Janata Vimukti Pariman holding their May Day rally in Colombo itself. And then you had the Sri Lanka Freedom Party holding their May Day rally in Cape Gaul. It was not about the workers' rights. It was about showing how many people would be able to come to their respective locations. What is happening to Sri Lanka? In the midst of all this, there was some good news as well 2.5 weeks ago. That was Sri Lanka being able to secure the GSP Plus concessions. Tonight on the show, we have the man himself who went to Brussels, got the vote and came back with a huge feather on his cap. That is none other than Dr. Harsha De Silva. So let's introduce our guest this evening. Before that, let me tell you what the topics are going to be today. We are going to talk about GSP Plus, way forward. When will Sri Lanka receive the GSP Plus, and what would be the benefits that we would reach and reap in the next few years, in the next few months? If Sri Lanka moves on to the next level, what is going to happen then? Then we're going to talk about the energy sector in Sri Lanka. Are we really geared up to take on the future? What is happening? Then we're going to talk about the India and Chinese involvement as far as Sri Lankan ports are concerned. Have we really sold it to the Indians, the Trincomalee port? Have we really sold the port in Hambantota? Or are we getting there? To discuss all this and more, we have with us four eminent personalities who have been on the show before. Let me introduce them to you very quickly. Joining us this evening is Professor Rohan Samarjiva, a founding chair of Learn Asia. Nice to have you on board, Professor. Also joining us this evening, as I did mention to you before, is Dr. Harsha De Silva, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Dr. De Silva, tomorrow, will you still be the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs? Not yet sure. We'll discuss all that and more as the show goes on. All joining us this evening is Dr. Tilak Siamalapitia, International Energy Consultant. Thank you very much, Dr. Siamalapitia, for joining us. Also joining us this evening is Mr. Rohan Maskorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. Nice to have you on board as well, Mr. Maskorala. So let's start off with Dr. Harsha De Silva. Dr. De Silva, somewhat of a victory for Sri Lanka. This is what your government envisaged, said that we would get the GSP Plus. And you were in Brussels 2.5 weeks ago. You were able to get the vote, and now you're here. What is the next step?
Well, after the vote happened, there was another discussion in INTA, that is the international trade body within the European Union. That went off without incident. Then we had a meeting of all the permanent representatives of the 28 countries. That also went without incident. We have another plenary in Strasbourg on the 11th. That is a few days from today. That there is no vote there, but it is an opportunity for those who voted for and against a resolution to I guess say a few words, so the debate is not a lengthy one. So we will see some, or we will hear some good and bad discussed in that plenary. And then on the 15th, the proposal by the Commission to give GSP Plus to Sri Lanka goes to the Council of Ministers. So the Council of Ministers is like the cabinet, only that if it is a trade issue, it will be the trade ministers of the 28 countries. If it's a, say, a cultural issue, it will be the cultural ministers. So it goes to the Council of Ministers, and we have to get everybody to agree.
So all 28 ministers, would they agree to the Sri Lankan proposal as far as GSP Plus is concerned, or would that go in another way?
We are absolutely confident. Let me tell you, I was there. We have done our homework. We know what we are doing, and we are absolutely confident that everyone will be on our side. And on the 15th, once they ratified and sign off, we can announce to the folks here and overseas who are waiting to come and establish factories and so on, to take advantage of absolutely, totally, completely duty-free access to the European Union for 6,600 products. We'll be able to announce the good news on the evening on the 15th.
Dr. Silva, you said that all 28 Council of Ministers should agree to provide the GSP Plus concession to Sri Lanka. What if one minister says no? What happens?
That won't happen. You replay it after the 15th. That will not happen.
So would you be there on the 11th?
No, I'll be here.
And why is that?
Well, Vesak, Modi is coming, we have done the work, we don't need to be there. We have our ambassador, we have our staff, we'll have our people.
So there's not going to be any Sri Lankan high-level representation on the 11th for the plenaries?
No, 11th plenary is not a vote. The 15th council is the decision.
So 11th is not a decision. Representation from the Sri Lankan government on the 15th?
No, our ambassador will be there. He can handle it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harsha De Silva. When you say that he can handle it, seems to me that something has gone wrong after what happened 2.5 weeks ago. Are they trying to sideline you from the government? I'm sure.
No. If I want to go, I can go. I just don't want. I don't need to be there.
So the groundwork was set by you and everything is okay. You're saying all 28 ministers, Council of Ministers, Trade Ministers would say, go ahead, we'll get the GSP.
All done.
All done. Thank you very much, Dr. De Silva. We, of course, will talk to you about Sri Lanka's plans to give the Hamad port to the Chinese and also give the oil tanks that are not being used for many, many years to the Indians. We'll talk a little bit about that as well as the show progresses. I now would like to focus on Mr. Rohan Maskorala, who is the CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. Mr. Maskorala, many concerns are now coming into play with regard to the Trincomalee port. There were many concerns about the Hambantota port as well. The problem right now is not about giving away these ports to any other government, but the problem right now is the government's ability to communicate this to the public, the benefits of it. Where do you see the problem at the moment? What is going wrong for the government?
Yeah, you're right. I don't see any other products they are coming out with it or the plans coming out. I don't see it out of we have to be very worried about at all. But again, politically I think the government is not managing it properly. That's my personal view. The communication to the public, educating the public on these matters, how these things are done globally. If we want to be a hub, how we have to get foreign investment coming in, foreign participation coming in. I mean, not this government, the previous government also wanted to make it a hub. So obviously without major players of the world, people who own cargo, people who own ships, people who own terminals, if they do not come to this country, we don't have enough market here. We need to look at outside markets, especially India. So all these have to be communicated in the domestic languages to the ordinary people, and that is not happening properly. I don't know whether the government have enough technical people to explain this, but whenever I get an opportunity in media, I go and talk to them. I'm not into politics, but as a professional, I go and try to explain how other hubs are made. For For example, Singapore, Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a hub for China. One time it was an independent hub, right? So there is Dubai. So we want to be something like that in shipping. For that
So,
you
Mr.
need
Bhaskar,
foreign investment.
Are you trying to say that even if Sri Lanka had the ports, the Trincomalee port as well as the Hambantota port, we won't be able to capitalize on our strengths?
We don't have the scale. We don't have the
and the
scale. You see, even in Singapore, you've got ExxonMobil doing the bunkering side, the energy side being supplied, right? Major shipping companies have come and invested in their terminals, warehousing. Ships are owned by Japanese, Chinese and Europeans mainly, right? Now, if you look at the cargo side of it, Port of Colombo depends 70% of the Indian transshipment, Indian shippers' cargo. We thrive on the Indian cargo. Nobody talks about it. We cannot just be a 20 million market, and if we don't have the capacity and the cash to develop these things, we need foreigners coming and putting in infrastructure for us.
So, based on what you're saying that a landlord policy is the way forward for a country like Sri Lanka.
Definitely, I've been telling so many governments, go on to the landlord model. And you know that I worked in the port with Mr. Ronnie Dimmel, and in 2000 we came up with the proposal of the landlord model, including the jar container terminal. The problem is, today if you look at the landlord model is not the one. We have given too much of shares to some terminals where we are losing out revenue to the country. For example, the deep draft port of this country, nobody talks about. 85% is owned by the Chinese. That was given some time back, and that terminal is the growing terminal. I call it the gold mine of Colombo port. It has reached 2 million over capacity operation, which is 50% of the transshipment. So the money is actually not coming to us. It's going to the Chinese, and we are given 85%. Nobody talks about that 85%. So I've been arguing so much, why didn't we invest a little bit more on the landlord model, get local investors to come in, so that we could have at least a 1/3 share of these terminals. So the model the government has gone is wrong.
Mr. Mascorala, you're saying that the government's model is wrong. Are you trying to say that the government which is in power, or is it the former regime that is at fault?
I must mention this, both privatization of the Colombo port took during SLP period, during Mrs. Kumaratunga's period and President Rajapaksa's period, the CICT container terminal. So the current government has nothing to do with the, now it's only they are negotiating the East terminal with stakeholders to come in to develop the East terminal.
If the government is doing the right thing, why was there a 24-hour strike organized by the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation?
That I cannot explain, because again it's a communication issue and a dialogue issue with the government, or it's totally politically motivated, which I don't have anything to say
Mr. Mascorala, I'm posing this question to you because we had a few days ago, that was on Thursday, the strike action launched by the Government Medical Officers Association, and then we had the locomotive drivers also going on strike. I cannot see in any way the parallel between the Medical Officers Association as well as a locomotive drivers.
Neither can I, as ordinary citizen. It's a sorry state as far as I am concerned, and that's where we see the government has been quite weak in communicating and dealing with these issues, as far as my opinion is concerned.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mascorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. I now move my attention to Professor Rohan Samarjee, founding chair of Learn Asia. Professor, there is an agreement with India which we signed in the year 1987, which clearly states that in the event the activities of the port should be given to someone, it should only be given to India. Now, given this fact, India coming into play as a strategic partner with the Sri Lankan government, why are they coming? What is the ultimate objective, motive? What would India gain out of it?
Well, I think you need to broaden your perspective a little. Today, there is a port in Pakistan called Gwadar, which has got Chinese investment. It's almost 100% owned by the Chinese. There is another port slightly to the other side in Iran called Chabhar. That has got Indian investment in it, and the Japanese are willing to invest in it. There are ports in Myanmar, one in Saitwe, which is built and completed by the Indians, and another in a place called Chakpyu, which is built by the Chinese, and they are negotiating for 85% ownership of that with the Myanmar government. So there's all this infrastructure work going on in our region, and that is because Asia is where the economic growth is. Within Asia, the sleepy place, the last sleepy corner of Asia, which was the Bay of Bengal, is now booming. And there's a lot of interest in this area. So if we play our cards right, do our negotiations, work with the right parties, and I think we have got the right positioning. That is, we are working with the Chinese as well as with the Indians. And the Japanese are also in the picture, particularly with regard to Trincomalee. So I think if we play our cards right, we can ride this wave. This is the kind of wave that we missed back in the 1980s. In the 1980s, the Japanese were trying to bring a lot of money and invest in our country. While the investors' conference was going on at the BMICH, somebody decided to set fire to Colombo. And that was the end of that. So all the money went to Indonesia and Thailand, and you see what Thailand's situation is now. So we missed that opportunity, but here's another opportunity coming our way. There's this incredible competition for serving the burgeoning economies of our region. I like to point out that of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, 6 are around the Bay of Bengal. That is without counting China, right? China is about the 12th fastest growing. So India, Bhutan, Bangladesh is growing way faster than us, right? People don't understand that. If you don't watch out, they'll overtake us. Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, that's 6. China, which is trying to create an alternative to Malacca, that is what their whole strategy is. They don't want to be captive to that choke point in Malacca, where the ships have to go through this very narrow canal. They are investing in this whole region. And if we play our cards right, we can make something of it and bring the benefits to our country.
Professor Samarjee, with regard to Indian intervention, Sri Lankans don't particularly like it because what India has done over the last 3 decades or so with Sri Lankan politics as well as interventions. We saw this happening in 1987, we saw this happening even prior to that, we saw this happening during the war, we saw this happening right throughout our course as far as following the war is concerned in 1981. Again,
my only point that I would say to that is look at Korea and Japan. Japan conquered Korea and occupied it for many decades. I think you have heard about the use of Korean women as forced prostitutes for the Japanese army. There's an incredible hostility between the two countries. There are many, many historical wounds. In economic terms, do they work together? Do they cooperate? Did Korea get investments, technology, market access by working with the Japanese? The answer is yes. So you see, you shouldn't confuse things. Even if you have all kinds of unhappinesses, deal with those separately. Deal with the economic issues in a structured way, with legal agreements, with safeguards, with dispute resolution mechanisms, as I always say. Deal with them properly. But if you are going to, we have a saying in our country, in my language, Sinhala, which is, I don't know what it's in English. But it basically, you see, don't spite yourself.
So you're saying forget the past and forge ahead.
I'm not saying don't forget. Keep them separate like the Koreans and the Japanese did. The Koreans, I have had so many Korean friends and students, they hate the Japanese with absolute violence. I have never seen hate at that visceral level. But they do business together. That's what we have to do. We have a physical, geographical fact. We are right next to India. We are not somewhere else. We have to deal with India.
Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjee, founding chair of Learn Asia. Now move my attention to Dr. Tilak Siambalapitiya, international energy consultant. Dr. Siambalapitiya, Sri Lanka's energy sector is viewed as in a very sorry state at the moment. We're building the financial city of Colombo in a few years' time. We have apartments coming up in Colombo. Are we really geared up to take on the future? Isn't there an energy crisis in the country? The time starts now.
I would say yes, there is an energy crisis. About 3 years ago, I would not have said so. I would have said everything is fine. But certain decisions that were overturned over the last 2-3 years, and also certain systems of decision making that has been changed over the last 2-3 years, is now gradually taking particularly the electricity industry to a crisis. In fact, the crisis is already with us. There is a capacity shortage in the generating system. Of course, to the credit of all the people who worked hard for it, the country has almost achieved 100% coverage in terms of household electrification. The network losses are substantially on the decline. So there are good things happening as well. Everything is not so bad. But
are we geared up to take on the future?
Well, as of now, I would say no, we are not geared up, because unlike any other thing, electricity cannot be imported. Of course, you may later ask me why can't we import from India. But leaving aside the fact that there is a potential for a connection, electricity has to be produced and used in the country at the moment it is produced. You cannot store it except in small quantities in batteries. And also we need to remember very well that electricity production has to be from stable power plants if you want to run a stable economy. There are so many countries in the world where the threat of blackouts are never heard of. Whether it is rain or sunshine, electricity will be there. And that stability is brought in by large power plants. And if large power plants are not being allowed to be built, or when power plants are being planned for years and suddenly overnight the decisions are turned upside down, then of course short-term solutions, unstable solutions, expensive solutions have to be implemented. Then also at this point of time, there is Sri Lanka, actually sad to say, there is no approved long-term plan for the development of generation in the country. So therefore everything that is being built is to be run on diesel. So for the first time after several years, the first quarter of this year, 40% of electricity production was from oil, diesel and fuel oil. So that will have an impact on the price, and also the fact that these are being done in small power plants is causing obviously the system to be increasingly unstable.
Isn't LNG an option?
It is definitely an option. It's definitely an option. I myself was part of the team that wrote the final recommendation on what Sri Lanka should do on LNG.
So why not look at that option at the moment?
Well, it is being looked at very seriously, at least now. This recommendation came about 3 years ago. Nothing was done. I'm not talking about governments, but nothing was done. But now I believe it has significantly, it has drawn interest of the various parties. But we are not doing one thing right, because we are not structuring the liquid natural gas import terminal project properly. From what I hear, we seem to be accepting proposals that falls on the desk of various BOI officials and considering them as serious proposals. So therefore, you know, I've been in the government service decades ago. I know what these proposals have, largely brochures. And brochures cannot make a project. A project has to be properly structured, because these are very expensive projects. You are talking about $500 to $700 million for LNG terminal. So they cannot be structured in terms of a proposal that is just brought in by a friend.
Is the government serious about these projects?
I believe the government is serious. What the government is not serious on is in following a correct procedure, in defining what the project should be, and then conducting the required studies, and then inviting proposals in a structured manner. Because large projects, unfortunately, projects that are essential for energy security, cannot be done based on proposals that your friends bring to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tilak Senalapatia, International Energy Consultant, joining us this evening on the show. Let me introduce you very quickly, our journalists this evening. On to my immediate left is Nadim Majid, and on to my far left is Charita Fernando. So I open the floor for questions from the two of you.
Okay. My first question is to Deputy Minister De Silva. Sri Lanka reaching out to India for help to develop the Hambantota, to develop the Trincomalee Harbour, is seen as a move to balance India-China relations. Is that the case? What is your take on that?
Well, I mean, we have to be able to balance the two major forces. That is a political reality. What happened in the previous decade or so was we moved completely towards one, and to the detriment of the relationship that we had with the other. So it is how we deal with both countries, and it is not just Trincomalee, and it's not just only now. The India-Sri Lanka relationship, goes back, thousands of years, and at times they've been helpful, at times they have not been helpful, and that is also the reality. And it is up to us, the government, to be able to strategize how to deal with these two emerging huge powers who we have and they have mutual benefits from this relationship. So
we also know that there are plans in the pipeline for LNG facilities, and the government has reached out to Japan. So do you think it's advisable for an island nation like Sri Lanka, in a very strategically located position, to have multiple partners rather than leaning towards one major power? Does it give the advantage of otherwise one party would have significant clout over Sri Lanka? So do you think having multiple partners is beneficial?
Yeah, that is why we are doing so. I mean, just to sort of follow up on what Tilak was saying earlier, the MOU that we signed with India a few weeks ago talks of a 500 megawatt LNG plant, LNG terminal and floating storage regasification unit in Colombo, Keravalapitia. So that is what he said. Well, just not just brochures that are landing up on various BOI officials' desks. These have been, well thought out, planned to invite here, in this case, India and Japan, and in some limited competition. I hope we would be able to move this along. And I don't see anything wrong with that. I see that as being positive in ensuring that we work with our friends and we cooperate with our friends in a mutually beneficial manner.
Dr. Samarajiva, with regard to the MOU that the Deputy Minister is referring to, there are no timelines set in stone in that. How important is it for the joint working groups that have been or are to be established on each of these individual projects, the LNG power plant, the storage unit, the terminal? How important is it that, or what time frame would you like to see all of this happening in?
Well, with regard to the energy, the electricity, the elements that are connected to electricity, I would say it's of absolute urgency. Otherwise, we might be having rolling blackouts by as early as 2018. Tilak can correct me if I'm wrong, but my guess is 2018, which is next year, right? So if you don't want to avoid that, we would fast track everything. We would have people really managing execution on that. And let's be honest here, Sri Lanka doesn't have a reputation for moving things along fast. India also doesn't have a reputation. If you think about the Sampur coal plant, right? they have been ever since the LTT was chased out of that place, they have been talking about it. Now that's about more than 10 years, right? And nothing happened. I actually went to Sampur once and I went and looked to see whether there was even somebody had actually started digging in the ground. Nothing, right? So I think it's extremely important that if we are not to face an energy crisis, I personally feel that we might not be able to duck this bullet because we have waited for too long. If we are going to minimize the effects of the blackouts that are coming at us, we have to really move those forward fast.
But how can you move this forward fast and still maintain sort of a democratic consultation process?
Well, it's not democratic consultation that happened with Sampur, right? Just wasting time. Now, you take, for example, certain other parts of what we have signed that people are getting excited about, which is these oil tanks that have never been used since they were built by the British. It's not like we built them or even our kings built them, right? It's the British colonial powers that built these tanks. And they have never been used, the majority of them, right? And they are in the jungle. Now, in my opinion, while everybody is getting all excited about it, the only way it makes sense for a company, because this is not, or a government, I hope our government will not invest in these things, because it's going to be a joint venture, some kind of commitment will be necessary. They'll have to spend about $1 million per tank. Now, believe me, I don't think that kind of money or that kind of expertise is in the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, right? So, where's the money coming from? That's the first question. But the money won't come unless there's a business case. And I think that unless there is some kind of major industrial development that will cause lots and lots of ships to come to Trinco, there may probably be no case for that many tanks to be developed, right? People are talking about this like some kind of money falling on, the tanks are there, we can make money of it. There has to be a business case. Or somebody has to take a decision that they are going to use this as storage locations to play the world energy market, right? So, the difference between future prices and spot prices, they'll keep it and then they'll sell the oil at the right time and then they'll start buying and they'll keep it again and things like that, right? There's been all this talk about Trinco as a place where they park the tankers that are not, the ships that are not being used. All kinds of ideas have come for Trinco. But without a business case, I don't think there's any value in accelerating that one. The key is the business case. In the case of energy, the business case is very clear. There are real dangers to not doing it quickly.
Mr. Vasakorala, on the subject of shipping, you correctly mentioned about the CICT terminal in Colombo. Charita and I had the good fortune to visit recently and sort of see the efficiency with which that place is being run, and to get some figures on the actual operations, their capacity, their turnover, the revenue that they bring in. It's quite astounding, really. When you see the direction that the discussions are taking with regard to Trincomalee Harbour with India and the Hambantota port with China, do you fear that we may end up in a similar situation, sort of giving away 85% and not really being deprived a certain amount of revenue?
Trincomalee?
And Hambantota both.
Well, you can't compare this because Colombo is built for a container port. Container business is something different. Both Hambantota and Trincomalee are looked at other types of shipping, that is bulk, dry bulk, gas and things like that, because basically Trincomalee is way off the major shipping route, so it's very unlikely that transshipment boxes are going to come into Trincomalee unless we do a fast rail track from Trincomalee to Colombo to connect India's east coast, which is a possibility because you can cut down the shipping time coming around Sri Lanka. That is quite a possibility which I have made several presentations. I don't know whether the governments are looking at it. But Hambantota again, it's a long shot because I don't see major international shipping lines and terminals have shown their interest. Because it will be totally overcapacity if it is going to be containerized cargo. and there will be huge problems for terminal operators in managing price. So they would like, even the Chinese I think had put conditions that they would not go into container operations in Hambantota till about 2025 or 2030, where Colombo gets the volumes running. So I can't compare two different types of ship operations and say that is, but Colombo, of course, yes, it was a gold mine, it was a developing, we always had the volumes. Every time we extended our jetties, we got the volumes out of India, and the big ships were coming here. What you got to understand is, it is not India who decides whether a ship comes to India or Sri Lanka. It's the ship owner who will calculate his unit cost of calling a port and the efficiency of that port, how fast it will be turned around, and what is the volume and the catchment area of that port. That is why India has been trying for a long time to build transshipment ports, but we really don't think that India will never be a major transshipment hub at all, because we are located in a much better situation.
As the CEO of the Shippers Academy, though, what would you like to see happening in the discussions on Hambantota and Trincomalee?
Well, Hambantota port, I have no objection of working with the Chinese, and I don't see that we can generate business, whereas China has its One Belt, One Road initiative, which is a very serious initiative where 65 countries have signed in. Major projects have already on the land-based side has started. The railway line from China to Europe is now operating. Even countries like Germany are in it. Major ports are built in Africa. So for the Chinese, Hambantota is not a, they are not worried whether they make profit in 5 years or 10 years. It's a long-term plan for their trade and supply chain security. Whereas Trincomalee, if I look at it as the development of the Bay of Bengal. It can be turned around to some kind of a distribution hub, even for oil. If the economies of that region, as Professor Samarajiva says, keeps moving, there will be more activity coming and more volumes of ships might start.
There's a Dr. De Silva, but let me interrupt you for a second there. Dr. De Silva, we're speaking about giving away a few tanks in the Trincomalee port to India. Professor Sarwan Samarajiva said that one tank would cost a refurbishment cost of approximately around $1 million, and India has the money, India has the technical capability to do so. Given this fact, would there be any involvement from the Indian military in the Trincomalee port in order to secure those tanks? Because at the end of the day, they are investing money on petroleum, they are investing money on the tanks. Would this mean in any way that there will be the Indian military involvement in the Trincomalee port? And if so, would that really anger the Chinese who are looking at having a stake in the Hambantota port?
No, I think there is a misconception here. Let me quickly read this. The upper tank farm in Trincomalee will be jointly developed by India and Sri Lanka, that is Lanka IOC PLC or Lanka IOC and Ceylon Petroleum Corporation. The joint venture between LIOC and CPC will be set up by the end of July 2017, and business development proposals will be prepared by the JV by September 2017. So there is no giving away of any tanks to anyone. And also, as a part of the business development plan, the JV will prioritize development of 10 tanks in the upper tank farm for exclusive use of the government of Sri Lanka.
No, but at the end of the security of these tanks, if the Indian oil companies come
where is, let me finish it. The land of the upper tank farm, which is currently in possession of Lanka IOC. Don't forget that. So this is the current situation. Pursuant to the 2003 agreement, will be leased to the JV through Lanka IOC PLC, which means currently what is exclusively owned by India will no longer be owned by India. It will come to the joint venture company, which is one that is constituted between LIOC and the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation. The land of the lower tank farm, which is also in possession of Lanka IOC PLC, pursuant to the 2003 agreement, will be leased to Lanka IOC directly. The period of all leases will be 50 years, extendable to 99 years. So you see, what is happening is we are moving from a less favorable, if you want to call it that, to a more favorable agreement. We are moving from an exclusively Indian-owned operation under the 2003 agreement to a Sri Lanka-India joint venture agreement. So there is no no issue of the Indian Navy hanging around the Trincomalee oil farm, because it is a joint venture company that is owned equally by Ceylon Petroleum and
Let's say, Doctor,
IOC.
there is another country, another oil giant, just like the Indian oil company, looking at investing money in the Trincomalee port, the oil tanks in Trincomalee. Can that be done?
Yeah, of course, Japan. And Japan will invest.
But based on the 1987 agreement, very clearly states that the Trincomalee port, handling of the Trincomalee port can only be given to the Indians.
Well, I am
given
not...
that scenario, you really can't give it to another country, can you?
No. I don't know exactly how that has been renegotiated or what have you. But what the fact of the matter is that Greater Trinco Development Plan is going to be done with the support of both India and Japan. And in fact, the Singaporean architectural firm, Subrana Jurong, has already begun the work together with the government of Sri Lanka and with the input of India. So whatever the agreement of 1987 says, the Greater Trincomalee Development Plan is something that is going to be done jointly with the Japanese and the Singaporeans and the Indians.
Now, one of the allegations leveled by the joint opposition, which is in Parliament, is the fact that the country is being sold to other countries like the Chinese, the Indians.
No, this is absolute crap, no. Where have we sold? I mean, the other day I was speaking in Parliament, I told them, why don't you show what we have sold? Where? As opposed to the Mahinda Rajapaksa government that sold the military headquarters to China. As opposed to the Mahinda Rajapaksa government who agreed to sell 50 acres of the reclaimed port city to China. To sell. It was sold. Right? I mean, let us not just get carried away by nonsense that is being uttered by some, bankrupt politician. The fact of the matter is that the sale happened during Mr. Rajapaksa's time. The defense headquarters, the army headquarters was removed and taken away somewhere else, and that land, 10 acres of land, was sold to Shangri-La. I am not saying whether that is right or wrong. All what I am saying is the sale happened then. And in fact, the next 10 acres was also sold to Katik, but before the sale was completed, it was abandoned. So currently what we are doing is to lease this land, and all these leases are being done not to some private enterprise but to joint ventures which are owned by Sri Lanka and another country.
But Dr. Silva, at the end of the day, the general notion is that when there are protests taking place in Sri Lanka by Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, a 24-hour strike that was launched in Colombo and outside, there is a problem. People start raising their eyebrows saying, okay, what are they trying to do? What is wrong with the government's communication mechanism? Has it come to a stall, or are you not communicating it properly to the public? As Mr. Mascaral said, there is an underlying problem there. What is going on?
No, I agree that maybe we can improve our communication so that a clearer message is delivered to the public. And in fact, we have been talking about it in the last few weeks, and hopefully we'll have a better mechanism in place. But the fact is that these fake news, the alternate facts, have somehow gained perhaps more attention than the real news and the actual fact.
Professor Samarajiva, my question is related to Shamir's last question about communication strategies. Now we've seen protests after protests over joint ventures involving India and China. It seems like the public has lost confidence in the government in its capability to get the best deal for Sri Lanka. There can also be a politically motivated agenda behind these protests, but is that a genuine, is that a concern that there is this lack of trust that the government may not be able to negotiate and secure the best deal for the country?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's a long stretch from the public has lost confidence. Now you show me a representative sample survey. I know how to do surveys, I know how to interpret them. I'll tell you whether the public has lost confidence. I don't think your company has commissioned any, right?
No.
I hope the government is doing some surveys.
But when you
But
talk
that
to
is
people,
the only way we can talk about the public. So you can't talk about the public at this moment. Now what you have are trade unions, some trade unions, who are taking various positions. Now there is a doctors' trade union of some kind, which is engaged in these, involved in trade issues. This is like me trying to advise them on heart operations, right? They don't know the subject and they're getting involved in trade policy. They don't know anything about investment. So I would say either this is either ignorance or there is some political agenda behind some of the union activities. Now I pose the question. I won't say that about the petroleum unions, because with the petroleum unions at least they know the facts. They know that these tanks, which were built by the British and never used, I want to emphasize that the British Eastern Fleet was in Trincomalee only for 6 months. Before the Japanese bombed, they had pulled back to Maldives, to near the Ghana Island, and then they pulled to Mombasa, right, the African coast. So they never actually used these tanks that were supposed to provide fuel for the Eastern Fleet. So these tanks have not been used, right? So the unions should know that, right? There are 3,000 employees in the petroleum storage tanks, whatever, there's a special unit within the CPC. They know this very well. Now, it really puzzles me why they think that their organization, which is basically one of the monsters that has been destroying our budget, according to Minister Sarattamunugama during the Mahinda Rajapaksa period, they don't have the millions required to develop these tanks. You can't just go and start pouring oil. Now, where is the oil going to come from? We know the CPC's commercial capabilities when they did the hedging. The taxpayer had to pay for that one also, right? So they don't have the capability, they don't have the money, they don't know how to get the markets to develop these tanks. Now I fail to understand why a trade union that knows these facts is engaging in this completely irresponsible strikes.
Could it
because
be
to
that
tell the people, we are selling the family silver. Now I think I would blame the media also for talking in these terms. This is like saying a country or a commercial the commercial activities of a country are like household. Households don't invest, but businesses have to require investment. The focus is not on what you have. The focus should be on the investment that is required to make something of value in the future. Hambantota, the real problem, again I would tell the government also. The government has been talking about the debt. But the real challenge that the government has is to make something of Hambantota, you have to invest a lot more. Every investment requires business cases and requires a good understanding of the risks involved. Now you don't want government money, if we have, let's assume that we have unlimited amounts of dollars to invest in these things. We don't want them investing them in things that are not likely to give a return, that are highly risky, right? They went into the airline business, see what happened. In 1 year they were losing 3 times the money, the entire money that we were spending on Samurdhi, which is our largest social welfare scheme. In 1 year they were losing 30 billion because they went into risky businesses they don't know how to handle. So I don't really want the government, I differ Rohan from your argument that we should have greater investment stakes in these things. We should have fees, we should have royalties. but we should not get into the risk issue in these highly risky infrastructure in the activities.
But
Thank you
could
very
it
much.
be that
Shahid, I need to interrupt you for a second. Let me pose a question to Dr. Tilak Semalapatia. Doctor, some interesting notion was brought forward by Professor Rohan Samarjeva. 2018, we might have rolling blackouts. We had Dr. Harshad Silva saying that we have already planned to commission an LNG plant. 2018 is just next year. How long will it take to set up an LNG plant?
If it is a land-based terminal and if it is properly structured and a letter of intent issued to a structured project,
How long
not to
will it
an
take?
unknown party, it would take a minimum of 3 years.
So then we are at a crisis. 2018 rolling blackouts, we don't even have a proper plan.
No, of course there is a fuel that will come to our rescue, that is diesel.
So are we geared up to take on the
We are
future?
getting very quickly geared up to use as much diesel as possible.
So
And
what I'm
it's
trying to
happening
say,
already.
are you trying to say that the government's vision to have solar power panels at every household will not work?
Well, it will work as an incremental input during daytime. No country runs their power systems and industries with solar panels. Solar panels, as well as to a certain extent wind power, are incremental additions. All countries are doing it. We are also doing it. There is more scope. But then we must remember, Germany or India or even Singapore is not running on solar panels. Of course, when you land in these countries, what you see are the solar panels. But those economies are run with power plants that are hidden in the jungles, which they will not show you. The coal power plants and the nuclear power plants in India, probably no one has
Why
visited.
not move into something like a nuclear power plant? Isn't that the future?
Well, that's a difficult policy decision for any government. Positive aspects will be that in the longer term it can provide electricity cheaper than anything that you can think of. It is good in terms of greenhouse gas emission management. But on the negative side are the waste related issues, and most importantly in my point of view, the size of our economy. As long as the power plant runs very well, of course the reliability levels of nuclear power plants are increasing, particularly after Fukushima. Many people think that reliability has gone down. Actually, the reliability has increased because people are now even more cautious, and safety aspects are even more stringent. But given the size of the economy, in case we have to face a cleanup operation, the cost will be massive. It will run into probably $100 billion.
Dr. De Silva, you spoke of fake news. You said that the joint opposition is are politically bankrupt. I want to drag your attention to Friday's parliamentary proceedings. A supplementary allocation of 330 million rupees was tabled in Parliament to buy vehicles for 6 ministers, a governor and an official. Has the government got its priorities right?
Well, I mean, that is not fake, that is true. I mean, look.
Are you setting the right precedent?
Look, I mean, it's difficult to explain, but each individual minister must prioritize what he or she is spending his or her money on. Right? I mean, yes, I have an allocation. Have I bought a car? No, because that is not priority. Some of these ministers who have new cars don't need new cars. I mean, let me be quite blunt. You can drive around in the cars some of these people have. So I am not necessarily in support of buying brand new cars for every minister, every ministry. Some of the ministries don't have, and because they have been recently established, and perhaps they need. So therefore, I cannot explain this, and I am not in favor. That is my personal view. But I want to go back to what Tilak said. You said land-based, but Tilak, in the MOU, it talks about a floating terminal. So is there a difference if it is a floating terminal versus a land-based LNG plant?
Well, it gives an option. It says land an LNG terminal, which in the jargon means a land-based terminal.
Yeah.
Stroke floating storage.
Yeah.
So floating storage is it doesn't mean that it is just floating anywhere. It has to be floating in a sheltered location, which is a harbour.
Right.
So, and there has to be a regasification.
So these are like barge mounted?
Barge mounted, but
how long will it take? I think Dr. De Silva brought in a very good point. If it's a floating terminal, how long will it take?
Well, it's difficult to say. Most of the time is consumed in contract negotiation. And
let's put the contracts aside, because now the Sri Lankan government has signed an agreement with India. So let's say the contracts are clear, you can go ahead and set up a plan. How long will it take?
This is not a contract. This is just a MOU.
MOU. So
right?
let's
MOU which says that a letter of intent will be issued.
Let's say
I don't think
there's no issue with the contractor. We have the right design. How long will it take to establish a plant or put up a plant, to set up
Depends
a plant?
on from where you start counting your time. Right? If you start counting your time from now, I can briefly tell you what has to be done. First of all, a technical proposal has to come in. So usually what countries do is they prepare...
No, Dr. Silva, you said 3 years for a land-based plant.
That is for construction,
For
from
construction.
the time that you have signed the financing agreement to
Right, so
construct.
let's say if you put up a plant, a floating plant, how long will it take?
Well, floating plant can be actually built elsewhere and towed into a location.
How long will it take?
Well, I would say it's about 2 years, because these are not available off the shelf, right? But of course the construction on the ground is less if it is a floating terminal.
Dr. Silva, again a problem 2 years from now. Sri Lanka is going to face an energy crisis in 2018, according to Professor Samarjiva.
Well, Tilak is sort of the expert, and this whole long-term power plan, for the first time it went through some public consultations, I think in 2014 or 2013. Yeah.
Yes, every other year.
Yeah. And there has been, from what I know, disputes and inability within the profession also to determine how to move forward. Some people say go this way, some other people say go the other way. There seem to be no convergence.
Inabilities and disputes. Are you trying to say that this will never happen?
Well, I have a standard response to that. It takes 5 years to take a A-level student and make an engineer or an economist out of him, and it takes a further 10 years to make him a power planner. But it takes only 1 minute for a politician to become a power planner and overturn all the decisions which are done after so much of analysis and calculations, and 20-year plans done, updated every other year. But then decisions are overturned in a minute, and then of course we can say there is no plan.
The gentleman on to your right is a politician, but before that he was an economist, Dr. Siamala. So I'm sure he's making some sense out of
I
what
don't
he's
think
trying to
he
say.
has overturned any of the decisions. He was not any party to. If he had the authority, I'm sure he would not have done that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your thoughts in the first and second round. We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's Face the Nation. We're talking about GSP Plus, energy sector, as well as are we really giving out our ports to India and China? If that is the case, what are the implications and what are the benefits that Sri Lanka can reap by giving these ports to countries like India and China to develop and take it forward? Stay connected. Stay with Face the Nation.